Hello, and welcome to tonight's episode of Expedition Dogman. My name's Jamie, and I will be your host for this evening. As true to my word, last week I mentioned I would post more about the LBL when I dug for more information. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the particular tale I was looking to tell, but during my digging, I did come across a website called the Demon Hunters Compendium, and on here I found a very interesting tale about the events of the LBL massacre. As we know, during the massacre, the first person the police talk to is a gas station attendant. And I don't know if this has been covered on YouTube before, or whether this is a fake blog, or whether it's just somebody's blog, but they have the tale told from the attendant's point of view. And tonight, this could easily be groundbreaking research, but I have before me the tale told by the attendant from the attendant's point of view. So, The Beast of the Land Between the Lakes, a guest entry by Randy Merrill. Cryptozoologists note the following are real-life accounts of murderous beast which is said to haunt the National Recreation Area of Kentucky known as the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL. This creature fits the description of such other wolfmen or dogman as the beast of 7 shoots, the Michigan dogman, and the Wisconsin wolfman. What sets it apart is that it's been associated with the gruesome deaths of at least 4 members of one family. Just before we go into this, it is 4, not 5. I covered this in our last entry where we debunked Roger, and has been the subject of a well-orchestrated and documented hunts. The first 2 accounts are by Jan Thompson from the webpage Guardian Tales, and are reprinted here, verbatim. Before her accounts are fairly graphic. To be fair, the LBL massacre is very graphic. So I'm going to put a warning out now. This account may be not suitable for younger viewers of this channel. Listeners' discretion is advised. If you're not good with gruesome and gory things, switch off now. Anyway, The Beast of the Land Between the Lakes, Part 1. There is a national recreation area in West Kentucky that also runs down to Tennessee, called the Land Between the Lakes, or LBL for short. It's situated between the Kentucky and Barclay Lakes, consisting of more than 300 miles of shoreline, 170,000 acres of forest, and over 200 miles of walking trails. It is currently the focal point for over $600 million in the tourism industry. Prior to 1959, the area was called Between the Rivers. That was before the Kentucky and Lake Barkley dams were constructed, and before it was officially called LBL. In 1963, by President John F. Kennedy, and before TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, an agency of the federal government, took over the land and used its powers of eminent domain to buy and tear down all the houses, businesses, and community buildings through the entire area, forcing over 700 families to give up their homes. There are over 228 small family cemeteries, many forgotten about and lost, dotted throughout the acres of the forests, as it was once used as homesteads by early Kentucky settlers. Some of the earliest graves date back to the early 1700s, which includes the graves of white settlers, veterans from nearly every war, including the Revolutionary War, and also those black slaves and Chinese immigrants who worked in the iron furnaces that were in the area. There was also a very high infant mortality rate, and many of those children were buried right outside the cabins in which they were born, so that their mothers could peer out the windows and see the graves. There are also numerous Native American graves scattered throughout the acres, much older than the earliest of the settler graves, some discovered, others lie in secret beneath the layers of leaves and forest ferns. Back before the 1950s, it had always been a very rural area, to live in, with farmsteads few and far between, and with no rail town to speak of, except up at the north end in Grand Rivers. It was in this town back in the mid-70s that I first heard the beast between the rivers, or now known as the beast of the LBL. Some old timers would sit on this long wooden bench outside the old IGA store that used to be the old country store, for decades before the grocery conglomerate came to town. I used to hang around there on the weekends during the day and listen to the stories they would tell. These old men, most of whom used to live in the LBL before they were forced to move, had some very interesting stories to tell about that part of the country. There was talks of hauntings, Indian curses, mysterious lights over gravestones at night, old hag witches that lived deep in the woods, and more importantly, several tales of a wolf-like creature that stood on two legs that would come out of the thickets and attack their cattle and livestock, day or night. A creature that was taller than the average man by well over a foot, nearly 7 feet tall, with a thick long hair covering its body and a stench that matched that of some of the freshly opened graves that were discovered now and then. This wolf man left tracks like barefoot man, but where the toes should have been instead were paw prints. The head was a huge and wolf-like in appearance, with an extra-long snout and an uncannily sharp incisors that glistened from the moonlight, with saliva along with eyes that radiated red, like one of the hottest fires in hell, they'd say. It had long arms that ended with huge claws and long, spindly fingers with long pointed, dirt-caked claws. At night they would hear it howl unnatural, gutly sounds of painful, hungry agony, and at that warning, all would go out and tie up their livestock, and even bring their most prized selections inside their homes with them. The legend of the beast went back at least 100 years, was passed along through time, from family to family, and updated as new sightings occurred. One old man said that his great-great-grandpappy told him that the creature used to be a man, a Native American that had the ability to shift, a powerful shaman that had been outcast from his tribe because he used his magic for evil. The shaman had tracked and killed, while in his wolf state, by a few warriors, and a couple of settlers in the area. In his dying breath he cursed them and vowed to return from the dead to haunt the forests, and seek revenge on their families and all who lived there. Pardon me. Another man on the bench with a leathery, weathered face said he heard from his grandma that the beast was once a settler that came over from Europe back in the early 1800s, with a disease that turned him into a madman at night. The disease was eventually passed along to his children who never went to school, but stayed hidden away from the population. Many thought the family had died off, because for years they never saw or heard from them, and after investigations by some brave men, they discovered the homestead vacant and abandoned in the early 1900s. The sightings of the monster were still frequent throughout the beginning of the 20th century, and the elderly group on the bench told some unsettling encounters they or members of their family had with it. Each one told stories of finding livestock slaughtered, ripped to pieces and eaten upon, cows and pigs with their legs dismembered from their sockets. Even a few horses had met their end with savage attacks upon their bodies. A few of them described what they saw at different times when they caught glimpses of the figure by peeking out of the curtains of the windows into the night. One man said it jumped out of one of the horse stalls one evening while he was putting up some animals. It stopped in front of him, arms spread out like it was ready to grab him, let out a howl and then sprang past him and into the dusky shadows of the sunset. This particular man said he wet his overalls during the episode. Another man said he never saw it. but would always hear its baleful wails frequently at night. Not like a regular wolf or coyote. No, he said, it was deeper, longer, stronger sounding than what would come out of any animal I've ever heard. Another old-timer said his wife had seen it trying to get into the chicken coop, but it gave up after getting tangled in the chicken wire. They all had tales of someone's hound dog getting killed, ripped apart limb from limb. Someone's pig or cow or chicken getting eaten. The mysterious footprints left in the mud, and the stench it left behind wherever it appeared. And more than one had the same story of listening to it walk across their front porches at night and scratching on the doors and walls and leaving deep gouges in the wood they would find in the morning. All of them agreed that this was not a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It would be nearly another year or two after hearing about the mysterious beast that I myself encountered it at the home of a family member that I've lived in the same area. But this isn't the story I was wanting to tell you. This was just a brief introduction to the unwritten accounts of the darker side of the LBL. A prelude, actually, to the real story I will begin to unfold. I just wanted to lay some groundwork so you could get the big picture and form some of your own opinions and theories. Guys, please share this into the comments, your own opinions and theories of what the LBL is and what the beast is. Walk with me now as I take you back about 22 years ago, back in the early 1980s. Personally, I think it was 1975, but that's my opinion. Then I used to work midnights at the gas station, a few miles from the Kentucky Dam, which was a few miles from the beginning of the LBL in Grand Rivers. And it was one of these midnight shifts I had two visitors that would change my outlook on the subject of werewolves, and make me believe in what I had seen myself a few years back in the same area, but had kept between myself and two other family members that were with me at the time. But that's another story to be written. This story was never in the papers or on the news or had any media attention at all. It was kept hush hush, and a sacred silence was demanded on all those involved. It couldn't get out ever. It was a few weeks before the beginning of tourist season, and tourists were what the locals survived on. They were the bread and butter. A story like this would be like screaming sharks at Daytona Beach or child molester at Disneyland. The people would stop coming out of fear. Now guys, where the LBL is concerned, they rely on tourism. This is why this one was covered up. It's important to remember that. Two officers, I wasn't a witness to the fact, just a third person making observations and having conversations with two individuals who were part of the incident, who were involved in the whole ordeal. They had just come from the crime scene down in the middle of the LBL, after being there for over 8 hours. Some say it was 7, some say it was 8. It was around 3 in the morning and they were taking a much needed reality break. Two officers of the law, two grown men who both appeared shaken beyond description. A mixture of fear and confusion, shock and disbelief emanated from them both. One was paler than the other, a deathly pallor over his skin, and it was this one, I'll name him Officer Adams to protect their identities, that had to sit on the curb of the gas pumps, head between his legs, and expel the last bit of his stomach contents. The other officer, I'll name him Officer Bill, came in for some coffee for himself and a cup of water for his partner, then rejoined Adam outside. There were no other customers, so I went outside with them to see if I could offer some assistance with the ill man. He gladly took a few roulades I had extended in my hand. With his own shaky fingers, he struggled to get them into his mouth. For quite a long while, the only thing that was heard were the crickets in the nearby fields, the sounds of bugs hitting the fluorescent lights above us, hanging from the gas station canopy, and the distant sound of highway traffic that was far and few between. It was in these wee hours of the morning, my mind was buzzing with various scenarios of the cause of their distress. A tragic car accident, possibly a motorcycle wreck, a birthing mishap with drowned victims, a murder, a dead body discovered. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. That's why the cat has 9 lives. This guy's hilarious. I don't remember sitting down, but after about 15 minutes of this hushed stillness, I found myself beside them both on the curb, staring out at the darkness of the nearby corn pastures, letting my mind paint pictures of imaginary traumas. Adam spoke first, breaking the silence of obscurity. I can't believe it. It's not possible. I just can't believe it. In hushed agreement that was almost inaudible, Bill replied, I know it was. It's so unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this before. A long pause, a deep breath, and he continued, or even heard of anything like this before. I looked at Bill and then at Adam. They were both gazing open-eyed, unblinking, out into the inky colour of the night. Adam's lip was trembling slightly, and it wasn't from the slight chill in the late spring air. Something had filled them, with each with incongested fear. After a few more moments of silent reserve, my patience was rewarded with some slow, fragmented descriptions of their past 8 hours. Bill turned his wide, azure blue eyes towards me. They were glazed and bloodshot, tired, frightened eyes. With a weary, shaken voice, he began to unfold a tale that would forever be embedded within my spirit, like a nasty shadow that lingers around a corner, waiting to pounce, to awaken your inner fears once again. Why he decided to tell me of all people was beyond my comprehension. Maybe it was an avenue he felt safe to travel upon, to get it off his chest, off his mind. They were both frequent customers, and we knew each other on a first-name basis, but to divulge a torrid account of great magnitude, well, I can only say that the fear inside them, both at that moment in time, had to be released, eased, and extracted from their souls. Or else they may have gone mad with unbalanced thoughts. Without interruption, I sat entranced, listening to every word, absorbing them like an opiate, a spellbinding narcotic that hypnotised me into forgetting the world even existed. For the next half hour or so, they had gotten a call to help with an investigation at one of the many rural camps down in the LBL. The tourist season was about to start in a few weeks, so as usual there were some early arrivals that had come to claim prime camping spots before the areas were overrun with tents, campers and traveller trailers. The sun was setting low in the sky when they arrived at the scene. Several other official vehicles were already there, and there were many more to come, as they would soon find out. Many coming from other counties, and a few coming in all the way from another state. Several of these to come with coroners from different counties. One coroner vehicle was already present, as well as an ambulance, which would prove useless. Well, I'm sorry, but if a dogman attacks, an ambulance would be pretty useless. Anyway, 1 minute. As there was no one to save, the victims were all dead. Quite dead. Completely and totally, thoroughly deceased. A young married couple had come down to take it easy for a few days, were the first to discover the ghastly scene. Neither one of them wanted to stay behind while the other went for help, so they both nervously travelled to the nearest town, Grand Rivers, and called the authorities. They did not return to the LBL. They merely gave the arriving officer directions to the area of discovery and rented a local hotel room. Well, you would do if you reported it to the authorities in case they had more questions. With the sun going down, it got dark pretty fast, so there was a flurry of floodlights from the cruisers being pointed in all directions, along with the excited movements of the $50 flashlights being held by nervous, restless hands, searching the trees, the ground, the leaves, and the shadows. There was a parked motorhome at the site. Its frame was lit by the campfire close by, a fire that had almost gone out on its own, but had been rekindled by the new crowd of men in uniforms, so that they could have more light. The front and back doors to the home were open, one of the doors hanging by the hinge in a crooked slant. Through the windows they could see zigzag movements of luminosity as the beams and the flashlights searched the interior. Bloody handprints slid down the thin metal walls close to the front door, and more bloody hand paintings could be seen along the length towards the back door, their images dancing eerily in the firelight like some ancient tribal symbols. Adam and Bill didn't even want to imagine what was inside the motorhome, but then again, they would soon find out it wasn't what was inside, but what was outside that would change their lives forever. There was already crime scene tape placed in numerous scattered parts of the area, and little white flags on metal stakes stuck into the ground, marking evidence of ripped clothing, bodies and body parts, separated limbs, a pile of bowels, pieces of loose flesh clinging to the muscle tissue. What used to be 3 bodies that just hours before had been a happy family on a happy vacation to create happy memories for years to come. A father, a mother, and a young son. It's interesting to note at this point, why is there no mention of the daughter? Let's find out. The happiness was gone, destroyed by a psychotic madman. Or was it a man? A murderous rage had taken place, one so abhorrently appalling that there were few witnesses to the scene that had kept their composures or held their recently eaten dinners down. At first sight, the victims appeared to be butchered by some unnameable weapon, possibly an axe or a chainsaw. Upon further inspection by the first arriving coroner, the wounds on the bodies were determined not to have been caused by a sharp injury, but by some piercing, well-defined claws, and other wounds by some keen, moderately long insults, which is like your front canine teeth. Wild bear, wild cat, wolves. The coroner shook his head in baffled disagreement with each guess from the officers. The claw marks, for instance, on the back of the father's corpse, were distinctively made by 4 long claws with a small digit, like thumb, on the side. Its span, wider than a man's print, wider and different than a bear's mark even, with deep, deliberate gouges in the flesh. Rake marks from an angry unknown source, trying to grab its prey, that was no doubt trying to escape. The wildcat and wolf's theory was dismissed, as the open wound marks were apparently made by a more grandiose animal source. The bite marks were much larger than any mountain lion, wolf, or coyote. Whatever did it had a longer snout and more sizable teeth. There were also indications that in the larger areas of the cadavers of bite marks where the flesh, meat and bone had been yanked away from the body, like a human who bites into an apple and leaves the impressions of his bite and teeth marks. So were the open wounds on these individuals. Bears, well, they aren't native to the area, but who knows, maybe a grizzly did sneak in somewhere, but that was far-fetched. He would have had to travel several states and cross several rivers to even get close to that part of Kentucky. Everyone present was betting on the bear hypotheses anyway, and no one even thought of anything else to be caused of such a savage attack. A bear! It had to be a bear! From the back door of the motorhome, an officer stepped down slowly, pardon me, holding in his hands some type of garment, a dress, a small dress, that would have to fit a small girl of around 5 years old. He informed the onlookers that there were more little girls' clothes packed inside the coach. This meant there was a missing person or an absent body. A member of the family. They all prayed she was still alive somehow, hiding somewhere. A new search began. As time went by, additional law enforcement employees arrived, as well as a few volunteer rescue squad members. Groups were spread out and assigned to examine different areas and explore. Another coroner arrived to assist in the identification and causes of death. And much later, a third one showed up, this one from a nearby state. All types of samples were placed in plastic bags marked as evidence and carefully stowed away. As they were packing up what appeared to be one of the father's arms, one of the doctors noticed something wrapped in the dead fingers. Some tweezers slowly untangled a clump of long, grey and brown hairs. This too was placed in a bag, marked and put away to be analysed at a lab later. From somewhere in the nearby woods, about 50 yards from the campfire, a scream was heard, a man's shriek that turned into a long wail and then to whimpering. As others arrived, they could see by the gleam of the several flashlights that the cop was holding his hat in one hand and his light in the other. There was blood on his face, the front of his shirt, and on the brim of his hat. More blood could be seen dripping on him. It was coming from above. High in the trees, the flashlights swung, searching for the source of the mysterious bleeding. A very small hand could be seen dangling down from a tree limb, way up high, as well as a slender, lifeless leg that still had a white sock on the foot. The missing child had been located. It had been Adam that the blood had trickled upon, hitting his hat first, making him look up, and then feeling the thick, cold fluid sprinkling his face, then sliding into his nearly buttoned shirt. It had been Adam that had screamed. The little girl had apparently been carried up the tree and leisurely eaten upon while carefully laid across a large tree branch. More of the same long grey and brown hair was found, sticking in the bark of the nearby tree, near her body. After about 7 hours, most of the officers were sent away as a new team of investigators arrived. They were told not to talk to anyone of the incident, especially not the media. I'm sure that besides Adam and Bill, there were others who had to confess what they saw that night, if in fact this whole event ever really happened. Now, before we go on, some people don't believe in the case of the LBL, whereas others do. Tell me your comments in the comment section below. 1 minute, let me find my spot. Witnesses that had divulged the awful secret of that atrocious night at one of the campgrounds at LBL. About a month after sitting outside with Adam and Bill that night, they stopped in again during one of my midnight shifts. They were both rather more serious in nature, not like before the incident, where they would kid around while drinking their sodas and eating a snack or two. They had both aged in some odd way. Streaks of grey that had not been there before highlighted both of their heads of hair. Their faces had lines of worry and showed signs of stress. I would see them again many times afterwards, but on this particular evening, they informed me they got word about some of the lab tests that were taken on that dreadful night. The tests on the saliva taken from the bite marks and from the hair found on the man's fingers and in the tree bark came back with an unknown species origin. The closest animal that they could be compared to was that of a canis lupus, or wolf. Now, in most cases of cryptids, when things come back as a known species of origin, the government get involved and hide it. Whether Adam and Bill had played an elaborate hoax on me, I'll never really know for sure, but their sincerity and fear painted a picture of the truth in their eyes and actions. There were several more stories that I have heard about this werewolf. Stop there, it's not a werewolf. I do believe the case of the LBL is a dogman, but we'll come on to that in a future video. Over in LBL that have been told to me over the years since this particular incident. There were several groups of Boy Scouts that had seen it, several more campers, fishermen, and boaters that had seen it from the safety of their boats floating in some of the many bays that touched upon the shoreline. Hikers and bikers have heard its howling and have seen something stalking them while they were on rural trails, hiding amongst the trees and the foliage. Hunters have also ran across deer carcasses that have been brutally torn apart. There was even a pair of curious gravestone robbers. I think she means robbers. Those who go out in search of a century or more old tombstones, then make robbings by placing paper against coarse stones and using a piece of charcoal to rub across it, capturing the images and dates from the stones onto the paper, who've had a fearful encounter with it at one of the old cemeteries. It had actually come up to their car as they were leaving and shook the back of the vehicle up and down, leaving terrible scratch marks. Now, in the first video we did, do you remember the university students that had this incident? It's all ringing true now, isn't it? It had actually came up to their car as they were leaving and shook it up and down, like I said, as it tried to hold on to the little Toyota, whilst the tyres were spinning in the wet grass to get away. These two individuals didn't stop driving until they were about 40 miles away. Only then did they dare to stop to investigate the damage done. I myself have seen those scratches, much too wide for any man to have made them. They looked like they had been made by a heavy metal garden rake. But you'll never read about these in the papers, or hear about it on the news, or get a confession from any law enforcement official or man of office. The media will say it's a load of woo-ha, or just pranks, silly stories, urban legends, lies, tall tales and such. This is tourism country, and that means millions of dollars to the area, so you can't scare off business, can you? But as San says on her website, you can't tell me there's no such thing, because I have my own tale to tell about this creature. That story will come soon, I promise. I don't know if we get to find it, because that would be interesting. But this one had to be told first, for it is far more scary and full of detail than my own. And that bench, the long, sturdy, heavy oak bench that sat in front of the old country store for decades, it is still in existence. In fact, I had the grand opportunity of acquiring it several years ago, when an even newer version of an IGA store was built upon the same grounds. The previous owners remembered my fondness for sitting with the old-timers and having undying patience with their many stories, and they got a hold of one of my family members to ask if we would like to have it to keep in the family. The bench now sits in my front yard by the driveway, where I sit to wave goodbye to all those who have come to visit for the day. I've learned to always wave goodbye, because you never know when you will see them again. You never know what lies in store for you or them. What lies in the shadow, waiting, watching, with hungry eyes and a drooling snout. And that is the encounter of Jan Thompson even. Now that's interesting. Who'd have thought we'd actually get hold of the account of the gas station attendant? In the weeks to come we will analyse her story. But what's interesting to me is how she could tell through looking at these officers how genuine they were. And she even mentions typical traits of a dogman. But what do you think? Do you think she's correct? Or do you think the case of the LBL is made up? I know this video is over 30 minutes long, but I had to share this one because when I read it, it left chills in my bones. I wonder if it's doing the same for you. Until next time, my friends, be aware of the howl.